Hello there, Commonwealth from here. Dungeons, enemies, and weapons. Now what are we missing? Bosses, the highlight of so many Zelda games, the conclusion to any memorable or less memorable dungeon, or divine beast for that matter. Though in Breath of the Wild, they were also an obstacle with health bar and title in the open world. So be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press the notification bell. Let's go over how this game will destroy the 2017 bosses. Even Monk Mas Koshi. Ganondorf in Tears of the Kingdom marks for the return of the boss of the series, who is yet to have a bad fight, since Ocarina of Time, The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess all delivered the goods. Hence, the 20th Zelda game's main goal is to do exactly the same and show that Calamity Ganon was just a creation or puppet, a joke, while the real threat is far worse to deal with, and is what Monk Mas Koshi's multiple phases tested us for in the Champion's Ballad's climax. Ganondorf, the target for this entire Green Line hero's quest, since the Hylian champion ended up in the Shrine of Resurrection. Even so, Ganondorf will never let us face him again to the death until the end of the game, and to prevent that from happening, he will continue to send out his loyal servants and generals. That is what they are for. Though in this game we might very well see a division between Ganon's bosses on the surface and trials of courage in the sky. In the case of the Sky Bosses, think of the many tests of strength we faced against single guardians in underground Sheikah shrines. In that regard, this stone automaton might very well be their replacement. And it isn't like this is the first time we face a stone automaton testing our worth before being able to use the Master's Sword. The Wind Waker's Tower of Gods boss comes to mind. In other words, we might see dungeons and bosses in the sky and surface, but with two very different objectives. The sky wants to enhance the Master Sword gradually, sharpening it for the boss fight we are all waiting for, while the others are there to stop us from reaching said boss fight. It could be absolutely genius and completely in line with the two themes of this sequel, dualities and combinations. But we will not get into the potential stone trials and how the new hand leads us to them, but rather focus on Ganondorf's surface henchmen, as no doubt he will unleash them after how close Link got to him underground. Clearly, malice spawns or blights were not enough, so now he needs true manifestations of evil, or creatures that will go far beyond the boss fights of Zelda's past. You know those type of bosses where a single dungeon item that Ganondorf selected are weak to. No doubt, those times are over in the Zelda series, and to be honest, I'm content with that. Instead, we should look at what Breath of the Wild did with its bosses. Namely, force you to think. What do I have in my arsenal to counter and then destroy this foe? Or if you prefer, turning the boss fight into a puzzle. And that type of boss strategy is something that we have seen in the Souls series for a long time, before Breath of the Wild to a degree adopted it. Study the boss and its behavior and combine timing and dosage before retreat, turning each fight far more tactical than here is this item to destroy this boss. A perfect example of this in 2022 was Elden Ring, one of few games that isn't afraid to say you will die over and over again until you learn your foe, respect his strength and reach, and based on that knowledge, know how to survive, which at the end of the day is the only objective in any boss battle or duel for that matter. The only question that matters is whether you have what it takes to walk over the opponent's corpse. Survive. That is the simple philosophy and genius of From Software's boss design, which is pretty much like an exam that you need to be prepared for, but also on your toes in order to not fall into the traps that are in store. Elden Ring has brought bosses in open world games to a whole new level with their massive scale and complex nature. A true example of bringing down titans. A sense of accomplishment to bring down something that a human could not even dream to harm. True David vs Goliath game design that the Zelda team could definitely learn a thing or two from Elden Ring, Shadow of the Colossus, and most recently, Sonic Frontiers. The battle against the titans of that game are a good example of how the final boss doesn't have to be the titan, as we saw with Calamity Ganon and Dark Beast Ganon in Breath of the Wild, but the henchman leading up to the main villain of said game. Challenging established conventions, the goal of Breath of the Wild and its sequel, since do we really want to exclusively face a Titan Ganondorf/Ganon at the end of the game? No, we want a personal confrontation or scratch that duel. One where two skilled blade masters cross their swords and duel to the death. Just like what we saw in the Space World 2000 demo. A fight that might go beyond Hyrule Castle, across the 3 layers and perhaps even space. But one that should not suffer mechanically. To illustrate this with an example, Sephiroth at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 is great because he never changes his appearance. He's just a humanoid figure that we love to hate and who toys with Cloud until the end. We want to see the same with Ganondorf, though in a slightly stronger version than when we found him on the ground, just like these concepts from Ganon Doodles illustrate. So if we want Ganondorf to not turn into another Calamity Ganon or Dark Beast Ganon, then who could take Titan forms in Tears of the Kingdom, the bosses of surface temples? And here is what I hope it comes down to when we know that Ganondorf wants to bring the apocalypse based on what happened 100 years ago. The horsemen of the demon tribe, in contrast to the souls of the 4 champions who went to liberate in Breath of the Wild. Death, famine, war and conquest. 4 surface dungeons / temples with 4 horsemen in the 4 corners of Hyrule, and 4 in the sky with 4 final trials to enhance the Master Sword. One step beyond the upgrades we saw in Breath of the Wild's Trial of the Sword DLC, and if not that, then 4 on the surface and 3 in the sky to correspond to the 3 pieces of the Triforce. Right here you have the perfect boss build up to Ganondorf. 4 surface bosses that can be faced in any order, but where Hyrule Castle cannot be stormed and Ganondorf confronted, until also the Master Sword Sky Temples have been cleared. Finish them in whatever order you please, but the final struggle will not unlock until all his henchmen are gone and we have the right form of the Master Sword in our right hand. No more straight to the final boss, instead story and gameplay, and bosses on the surface and the sky. And then we mean beyond the surface bosses like the returning Taluses, now turned boss plus enemy camps, plus Hinoxes and Moldugas naturally. Duality in combinations, that is a game that honors but also goes beyond Breath of the Wild. Next level Elden Ring inspired bosses with Zelda tradition in one. That is how we take the next step, and the same goes with making each of the horsemen differ from each other. Say that one of them might even be a Yiga, perhaps even Master Koga, in a new, far more menacing Titan form. There are just so many possibilities when it comes to the bosses, and some of them have been illustrated by Ganon Doodles and others by Black Book Alpha / Alpha Gamboa. And while we want Ganondorf to be in his cunning and intelligent human form, we wish for the other bosses to be just as fearsome and inhumane as they have been in Zelda's past. Not just creatures of malice, but monsters that scream horror. Now, I hate spider bosses, and fighting the Armor Goma of the 2011 Wii U Zelda tech demo would scare me beyond belief. But isn't creepy boss design part of the Zelda magic? Indeed, and Breath of the Wild suffered from the malice syndrome, where every boss was just another goo of malice, and with the ultimate consequence that when we fought Calamity Ganon, we were just indifferent when we realized that he was just malice combined. Variety is key, as it grants us something that Breath of the Wild's enemies and bosses missed, and which they nailed in the weapons and gear category. The element of surprise that was so perfectly executed in every 3D Zelda game up to that point. I want the hype to be met and then surpassed as we face one monstrosity after the other, which will give us goosebumps because of their amazing design and scale. Just like when we faced our first Lionel in Breath of the Wild, a unique enemy that was harder than any boss in the game, not counting DLC. A top-down 2D Zelda enemy we had not seen in 3D Zelda until Breath of the Wild. Well, let's hope for the same for the bosses in Tears of the Kingdom, along with some brand new ones, as nothing can beat the originality seen of say Coloctos in Skyward Sword. The best bosses are often brand new and unique and not repeated 5 times across the same game. Variety, variety, and once again variety. That is the key to the bosses that will rank in our top 10 Zelda bosses of all time lists. You know, just like Monk Mas Koshia did in the final DLC, when the Zelda team realized that we want more than just Malice Blight bosses. Story and gameplay, not one over the other. Skyward Sword focused too much on story, Breath of the Wild on gameplay, and in the end, both suffered. So have both combined in a symbiotic duality like yin and yang, or the 2 dragons found in the logo of Tears of the Kingdom. And bosses are key in both the storytelling and gameplay department. Something that brings fear and horror like the concept art found in creating a champion, but also history and tie to Ganondorf to reveal bits and pieces until Link pulls his blade towards him, just like his spiritual ancestors before him. And then after Ganondorf, perhaps also towards demise. But that is to be the climax after a number of highlights that Tears of the Kingdom's new bosses will hopefully provide. Next level, just like we got a taste of from Wonkma's Koshi. Start from there and then go wild with each boss until we reach Ganondorf. To a degree that this is already the best Zelda game of all time before we have even faced the final boss. That is what these bosses need to be at the end of dungeons/temples, the best of Zelda's present and past, just like with everything else in this game. But what do you think of the new bosses we should expect in the 20th Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, a few months from now? Share your ideas and suggestions in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, then be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press the notification bell to not miss any of our upcoming Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Nintendo videos. Last but not least, a big thanks to all of you for watching to the end, and to all our patreon.com/CommonRealm patrons, and in particular our royal producer Charles Shash. You rock, and please enjoy one or both of these two awesome videos.